Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our How to Write Comics live stream panel discussion. It's presented by the Christian Comic Art Society. My name is Joffrey Strout, and today we are joined by our panel of writers. So we have Buzz Dixon, Louis Serrano, Eric Jansen, and Bryan Mero. So why don't you guys just kind of do a quick introduction of yourselves and kind of talk about your work real quick. Buzz, why don't you go first?
Okay, my name is Buzz Dixon, and my writing career goes all the way back to G.I. Joe, the original Transformers, and even before that. In terms of comics, I have written for Marvel, I've written for Disney, and I wrote for Alien Worlds and Tales of Terror comics. And I also had my own line of graphic novels, the Serenity series. We had 10 volumes of that. So I know a little bit about writing for comics.
Excellent. Let's go around my screen. Bryan, you're next on my screen.
Okay. My name is Bryan Mero. I've been writing comics for the last about 14 years independently. Started with a independent comic called Spirit Night. Since then, I've been writing books, and currently I write for Kingdom Comics and their Kingdom Comic Presents series.
Cool. All right. Then Eric Jansen.
Hi, I'm Eric. I'm a writer and artist, and I have been self-publishing for like 20 years. And well, let's see. I did this more than 20 years ago. This is actually a new cover, new version. And that sort of led to other things. And then I worked at a printing ministry. I also have gone to Bible school and was a singles and youth pastor. And I worked at a Christian printing ministry for 14 years. And there we did a lot of tracts. And I did some little comic books there also. And then I worked at Image for like 2 seconds and a couple other little companies that never went anywhere.
Excellent. And Louis.
So like Bryan, my comic writing is, my main project is Samson the Nazarite. So I've written that graphic novel. We got our 3rd volume in production. Also did a little mini comic. So I probably have the least amount to my resume than everyone else, but that's what I've done.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us, for coming on. And I'm going to try to pick some of the toughest writing questions I can to throw at you. So we'll see what you guys come up with for answers. So we'll start with something fairly simple, though. So what sticks out to you as the most beneficial practices or routines for successfully working as a writer?
Getting paid.
Well, that
definitely helps.
Yeah, let me sort of fill in the question a little bit more. Like, it seems that there are, everybody is going to approach writing slightly differently, right? There's different temperaments, but it seems to me that we can gain from each other's successful experiences. So, right, some of you will have things that work for you that might work for someone else in the audience. So, if you guys have any routines or things that you personally do in your creative process that help you, that sort of stick out as like, this is an important thing, I'd be interested. And I'll sort of throw it out to whoever wants.
Yeah, I think overall, reading, if you read on a constant basis, not only comic books, but all the time. I'm a big proponent for Stephen King, Dean Koontz, all these different writers who, as you can see their storytelling, you can see how they can twist and turn things together, and then come like overarching, put it together at the very end, which I find very beneficial when you're trying to put a book together, a comic book, whether it be sometimes I'll write 12 pages. Sometimes it's the full 24 pages of a book. And putting those together, putting that storyline together can be actually one of the hardest things in that small amount of space and pages.
Yeah, I just throw this in. I just heard somebody was using a template built for like half-hour comedies, and which was essentially like 27 minutes, and they used that to beat out every page would be like a minute for that template they use for writing comedies, for half-hour comedies. So it's interesting, you know, kind of the crossover from different disciplines. Anyone else? No one else has any successful practices they want to share?
I do. Especially if you're a self-publisher and you're working on your own schedule, you have to like sort of be your own boss and make sure that you sit down and do the work. And I just, sometimes the day or the week or the month gets away from you, but if you make sure to just put aside some time, like every day I do, for writing or drawing, it adds up. You know, even if you just put aside half an hour a day, you know, that's better than not half an hour that you spend on that. And I agree about the reading. Reading just really helps, but it also helps, you know, what you read. Like a lot of people were raised on awful comic books, and they're writing awful comic books. And other people, you know, there's some brilliant stuff out there, comic books and regular books and TV shows that you watch, and just put the good stuff in, and hopefully good stuff will come out.
Makes a lot of sense. Anyone else? All right.
Oh, I also have one more thing about that. I like to work in stages. So you got to start somewhere. So I'm a big believer in, you know, I wrote a book and I started with a synopsis of the book first, you know, and actually I did that way back when I was in college, and I took a writing class, and, you know, I wrote like two chapters every week for the writing class, and by the end of the class I had a book. And again, a little bit at a time, but that book, I started with a synopsis. I wrote the first draft. I lost the first draft. My teacher never gave back to me. And then I wrote the book again, and it was better the second time. And just, so I do like stages, or, you know, like an assembly line, even if you're the only person on the assembly line.
Yeah, I found using outline can help at times in terms of the process, where then I can say, okay, I'm working on this part of the outline of the story, and this is a chapter, and it can just help break out and make manageable what I'm working on.
Yeah, I've actually I've heard other writers talking about the like two camps of writing, one being an outliners and the other one's being, they call them like pantsers, or people who just write with no outline, the free write. And it does seem like people often fall in one or the other camp, whether you just want to just get writing for whatever and then edit it later, or start with more of a planning. So it sounds like
you have to find the right balance, because you need to have some idea of where you're going, where you're working towards. But at the same time, you have to be able, when something better presents itself to you, to adapt and go in that direction, or add or change things. You know, typically I come up with an idea. I have an idea of how it will end. You know, I have an idea how it starts. I have an idea of how it ends. And then the middle just has to fill itself in.
I wish it would just fill itself in when I try to write. Just go, fill yourself in.
That's one of the advantages of writing a comic book, is that you can have a single panel that condenses 20 years later. And then...
That's true. All right, so let's talk a little bit more. Like, I'm just curious if you guys have Do you guys think of that you have hit any points where you do something or think something about writing that is an unpopular opinion, but you still hold it firmly?
I dislike the advice, always finish what you start. No, sometimes you recognize it's a dog, you just take it out back and shoot it. You don't waste time with ideas that aren't going anywhere. And this is where it's important as a writer to be able to discern between I'm having difficulty getting through this stage of the story versus this story is unworkable. And you have to recognize that. I have on more than one occasion been working on something, I get a third of the way into it and I realize the approach is all wrong. The idea may be good, the approach is wrong. Jettison everything, go back, start over. And people don't want to do that. It's the lost cost fallacy, as they say. Well, I've spent so much time on this, jettison it. Go back, start afresh, approach it in a new way. So yeah, don't listen to the people who tell you to finish everything you start. Just finish what works.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just narrow in on that. Are there any tools that you use or processes that you use to try to identify like the story that is not just difficult, but is like a non-starter, like it's not going to go anywhere? Is there any methods you use to try to identify that?
I can tell it's not moving forward. If I find characters are just talking to one another and nothing is progressing, I recognize something is causing a blockage here. Something is preventing the story from advancing. I've got one story that I started at least 15 years ago that's halfway done. I've got my characters in an attic, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how to get them out of the attic. And so I said, okay, that sits over here. The day that I finally figure out how they get out of the attic, I can finish this story. But until then, I've got other things to work on. You just recognize that something isn't working. I have one story that I started twice, jettisoned everything I did, and now when I get back to it, I know the correct angle of approach. But the first time it basically boiled down to this. I was focusing on the wrong characters. And when I finally realized it's this person's story, it's not these other characters' stories, then I was able to work. One of the favorite things about the movie Zootopia, when they were developing the story, it was supposed to be Jack Wilde's story. It was supposed to be about the fox. And Judy Hopps was a minor character who was a minor irritant. And they kept coming up with Judy Hopps jokes. And they kept coming up with Judy Hopps scenes. And they'd all laugh and say, yeah, but throw that stuff out. Now, what does Jack do? They kept coming up with Judy stuff. And that finally, about the third or fourth meeting, somebody said, maybe this isn't Jack's story. Maybe it's Judy's story. And the moment they shifted it, things started falling in place.
Wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. Well, that's a good question to you guys. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, there's one thing, especially in comic books, that seems to be popular that I just hate with a passion. It's the everything you know is wrong trope. And that just happens all the time, more and more lately. And I just read like the first one, I think, where going back to the 70s, Steve Englehart was the writer of Captain America. And he figured that the Falcon was actually a criminal named Snap Wilson. And the Red Skull had like brainwashed him into being like a stand-up, upright guy that could be a hero. And it's like, what are you doing? This is like one of my favorite writers now or after that, but that was like the worst thing ever. But at least it was original at that point. In the years since then, I remember, I think Scott Snyder was writing Batman and Superman at the same time, like 2 or 3 years ago. And for both of them, he wrote everything you know is wrong. All of a sudden, Batman's origin was all orchestrated by the Court of Owls, and Superman, there was like another super being that crash landed in the 30s, and the government had been using him all this time, and he was more powerful than Superman. It's like, where has this guy been? What's going on? And that is just the scratching the surface, because like I think every comic book like the last 20 years has had a major storyline where it's like, oh, everything you know about this character or that character, or the origin, or all these people are related, but you didn't know they were related. And then the movies really do that when they adapt the comics. Yeah, it's out there and it keeps getting worse. But those are the storylines that grab the people, or like at least grab the talent, and then they force it on the readers. At least.
Yeah, and do the readers actually buy it? That's the thing. I can't stand the reimagining each character. Sort of like, it's the new 52. It's now Captain America is a woman, or it's like, can we stop? Can we just keep our beloved characters? If you want to go off into a parallel universe or something, okay, that's fine. Multiverse, if you want to call it. But let's and what they found is that, at least right now, especially with Marvel, most of the classically written comic books and characters, they're the ones who are doing the best. And it's like, at some point, the muckety mucks, whoever's in charge, will try and figure out that, well, maybe we shouldn't mess around with these characters. If we want these characters, write some new ones and write them well with good characters.
So let me ask that as a question, just in terms of craft. Like, let's say, wow, Brian's kind of
sorry.
Well, Josh, before you jump to your question, one thing that, in terms of your other question of like going against the grain of advice, is the very common advice of write every day. And that's just something that I find isn't possible for me, and even if I feel like at the most I could do maybe Monday through Friday, right? But writing every day just doesn't seem like, it just seems like an unattainable goal that just makes me feel bad.
I would agree with Lewis. And for me, I pretty much get a bug for like, oh, I got it. And it's kind of like the awe moment. And I'm sure Buzz has had that too. It's like, oh, now I know how to get them out of the attic. And I go in and I bust it out on the computer, and it's like you're in a time machine basically, because it's 3 hours later and you're putting your last bit of typing, and you're like, perfect. Well, now I can go back and I can massage it and fix it and make sure it flows on each page. And that's where kind of the structure of the comic book kind of, at least for me, it was my biggest struggle at the beginning.
And I mean, I'm not knocking the discipline. The discipline is definitely good.
Oh, sure. But it just doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, just to clarify, some of my answers will be tinged with the artist side of me. So I definitely want to draw like something every single day. I may not write something every single day, but at least you have a schedule. Like, even if you just do like, say, I'm gonna do something like every Friday. Stick with every Friday. But some people, they let real life get away with take them away from everything, and next thing you know, 3 months have gone by and you haven't done anything. Anything important, like comic books.
Right. Well, I want to just recognize that I think for any kind of creative endeavor, it does seem that the world at large usually feels more urgent than that whatever your creative work is. But at least I'll say for myself, if I go 3 months, 6 months, or whatever, dealing with all of the everyday emergencies, and look back and I haven't worked on my project for 6 months or whatever, then I feel like I feel like that's something I value has been lost. So that's, I think, one of the values that people are trying to promote when they say do it every day, right? Just because I don't think it's necessarily every day, but it's like, just be consistent, I guess. It might be a different rephrase of that. So let's just this may not resonate with anyone, but you were talking about like how people are taking, you know, classic characters that exist and have been established, and then they start writing them in ways that kind of recreate them or change them in pretty drastic ways. And those who love the previous visions of those characters or get frustrated. So like if someone were to, from the writing craft side, if you were handed a story that was a character that was already established and say, hey, do this story, what are some like guidelines that you guys think would be good, or ways in which to approach it that you don't lose what the characteristics, the things that are most unique and beloved about that character, but you can still do something new with them? Yeah, any ideas?
Well, just a quick thought of it. I mean, I think that when you take characters such as comic book characters, well-known comic book characters, Batman, Superman, other people like that. I mean, there's been 80 plus years of stories developing that character and trial and error. And they've honed in on like, okay, this is who this character is. These are their stories. And so like one thing that I don't like about the Zack Snyder's Batman is he's like, yeah, Batman has guns and Batman kills people. And I'm like, Batman's not the Punisher. Like, right. You've completely missed the fundamental thing of who Batman is, right? So, you know, and I think it's just in writing in general, right? Like, who are your characters? And if you're going against what's fundamental to that character.
Well, that raises an interesting question of what is fundamental to a character, because I'm a big fan of Archie comics, but if you follow Archie comics decade by decade, some of those characters change rather radically. I mean, Betty is now this wholesome girl next door. And, you know, in the 60s, she was a maniac. I mean, she would put Archie in the hospital if she got across with it. The characters will evolve over time with audience response, with new creators coming in with ideas. If I'm hired to write something, I ask the publisher or the producer, what is it that you are wanting to see? Because it does little good to go off and create something that isn't going to fit into their plan. I need to at least know, what direction do you want me to travel in? And if someone were to say to me, we want a classic Superman story, okay, I'll go all the way back to the 1950s. I'll find the classic Superman elements. You better bet there's going to be a Bizarro in it. And I'll write that. On the other hand, if they say we want, 21st century Superman, then I have to think what that means. Approach it that way.
I think that's.
I find that one of the problems with modern comics is that they're always trying to find something new, or they insist on something new. It's like, it doesn't have to be something new. Just give me a good classic Superman versus Metallo story, or Batman versus the Riddler. I've never read a really excellent Batman versus Riddler story. I don't need to, find out that Riddler was really working for the CIA all this time, and he has, I don't need you to reinvent the characters. Just give me like a classic story. Like, James Bond movies are the best example. They don't continually reinvent the character. It's just, they bring it up to date, but they just, they'll give you a good James Bond installment every single time for the last 60 years.
With the exception of A View to a Kill. An octopus.
I guess staying true to the character is really what we're talking about in terms of, do your research on what the character is, where do they come from, what are their motivations. I think that's a big part of it. I had a great English teacher in high school who would make us like write a history on a character before he even wrote our story. We'd write these short stories, and they're like, okay, who was he? Where did he go to school? What does he do for work? Is he married? Does he have kids? All the way down the line. And I've been using that as a basis of, okay, so if I have a character, they need to be full and they have to have life, and what happened to them, I think, is one of the main things like why are they this way, and why are they doing what they're doing, and what's their goal.
That was one of the advantages of being on the original G.I. Joe and Transformers series. You know, you'd be writing a story and you'd say, hey, was Roadblock ever a Rhodes Scholar? He is now.
Yeah.
Just throw things in there.
Well, can I throw a question out to the group? Are there books, so someone's like wanting to start writing comics, what resources or how would you counsel them to either here's how you start or here's how you improve? Starting points. Let's throw that to Buzz.
Ask that question because I came prepared.
All right.
This book for everybody who wants to be a writer. It's The Art of Dramatic Writing by Lejas Ergi. This is a classic book. It is specifically about writing plays, but all of the lessons in it are vital for any form of fiction writing. This is great. This is an absolute must-have in your library. Other books, I would absolutely have all of the Scott McCloud books. We've got Understanding Comics, which is the beginning of the trilogy. You got Reinventing Comics, and you got Making Comics. Those 4 books will give you a great grounding in writing in general and in specifically writing and creating comics.
Yeah. And the McCloud ones are comics, so they're easy to read and really enjoyable.
Yeah, even from an artist side, the Making Comics in particular is amazing. I mean, it's very helpful. It's written in the comics format, but it tackles so many of the things that are very, very practical, and they're all very. I think the sequence is good, kind of introduces you to things. So all of the books are great. That one is good for artists, I think. Anyone else have any resources or recommendations for starting writers?
My only recommendation would be, because I love movies, so I started reading movie scripts when I was in my teens, and just seeing how they put together, how they're putting the scenes together, how do they describe them, the dialogue, and then just for fun, I started doing my own. And now I have a couple scripts that have already been through the film festival circuit and have won some awards and things like that. But it's really helped me try to picture what I'm going to see on the page, because you're talking about panels here, and it's something you see if you see anything behind the scenes for a movie. They always have the panels of each shot they're going to do. So when I write, I try to be a description. Okay, this is an overhead shot. You're looking down at the character. It's dark. You just have one light on his face. Just things like that. So the artist, and Eric, you probably talk more about this, being both writer and artist. As a writer, I can create Eric's life really hard by just adding one sentence, or make it easy by taking something away. And I drove my artist crazy when I wrote my first graphic novel, and I wanted like 8 different characters, and they're all this over the place. And he's like, "Dude, I can't do that. I'm not a professional. I don't know what I'm doing." And I'm like, "Okay, it's one character, and and he's fighting these demons, and there's an angel." And he's like, "Okay, that I can do." And I was able to work around it. But I think having that background of looking at movie scripts really helped me try and figure out a way to write a script in comic form, per page, per panel, that you can put it into really a cohesive story.
There's a great resource online called Drew's Scriptorama. And it's got literally hundreds of movie scripts, some going all the way back to classic Hollywood, some recent. It's got like different drafts of movies. It's a wonderful resource, Drew's Scriptorama.
And I'm making, maybe Eric can also chime in on this. because one thing that I don't know where I heard or picked up was, as a comic book writer, it's almost like I'm just writing for the artist primarily or initially. And so that has, I think, pros and cons. And then it depends on who your artist is and how you're working with them. And also different things. So for some, you might be more detailed, and other you might give more leeway. Like, this just needs to happen in this scene, and they can flow with it, right? Where someone else, you might say, here's a reference shot, kind of stick to it, or this is exactly how it should go. Any thoughts on that,
Yeah.
Eric?
Let me answer both Brian and Louis. First, yeah, as a writer artist, they're sort of separate in me, though. The writer in me might want to write a 12-part epic where 100 people are trapped in an Escher-like landscape, nightmarescape, where they're just talking for like 7 issues. And the artist in me says, no, I don't want to draw that. Can it just be like 2 guys fighting for 1 issue? Yeah, that'd be much better. And then, even though I'm normally am a solo act, I still look at comic books like a factory line where it's like everybody is doing their part. And for the writer in me will work for the penciler in me will try to make things easier for the inker in me will make things easier for the colorist, who I will probably hire. And it all has to work together. And I learned that back at the printing ministry, because we did everything together there. It was almost, sometimes it felt like a comic book publishing house, because we did do some of my little comic books. We did a lot of tracts, and we did other, discipleship booklets. And I tried to, sometimes I helped on the printing presses, but I was also at the beginning with the ideas. And then the computer guy was in between. So I had to make things easier for the computer guy. And then the computer guy had to make things better for the actual printers on the printing presses, which they had to make things easier for the production line, where they cut and fold and staple everything. So I really that really just drove home the fact that you're a team, even if you're a one-man team, but the best thing you can do is make the next guy's job easier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I a lot of times I think just like how incredible the medium of comics is. Like, you can do much more than a movie can do, or just easily. And even in writing, like, one of the freedoms that I like is that, like, I'm just writing for my artist right now, and so it doesn't have to be polished. It's not like a novel where I'm like, this needs to be so polished. And so I'll just have notes that are like, dude, this is sloppy. Like, hey man, this should look like this. And here's a clip of a movie, and here's a shot, and it can just be like, we're talking right now. Now, I know that's very unprofessional, but I feel like it can be, it's a relationship, right? Like, you and the artist are working together, right? So it doesn't have to be like, I've honed what I'm trying to get across in this panel to you, polished like I would a novel.
I don't have a lot of experience, but I do have a little bit of experience with working with a couple of different writers. And like, one writer, very strict, and had to be, was telling me how to lay out the panel and everything. And then another writer, like our friend Kevin is just a great writer and could really work with me. And it's like, I never want to work with the strict guy again, but I will work with Kevin anytime he wants me to.
One of the best bits of advice that Steve Gerber ever gave me regarding writing comics was always give the artist an emotion that they can peg the panel on. Spooky house. It's a mischievous young girl. It's some emotion that the artist can go, okay, this is how it's got to feel. You can have a cheery old house. You can have a spooky old house. You can have a sad old house, but give them something that they can work with when they're drawing it. just
Yeah.
saying an old house doesn't give them a lot of leeway.
Mm.
I gotta talk about Steve Gerber for a second, because I just happened to be reading 2 different books of his. I just finished the Guardians of the Galaxy collection, where he brought them back in the Defenders for like 6 issues, 7 issues, and then they went into their own series for 6 or 7 issues. This is like early to mid 70s. This is like, how many years ago is that? That's 50 something years ago. Well, 45 years ago. And it still holds up. It's so good. And then the other book I finally got, like one of his last things that he wrote was Hard Time, about a 15-year-old kid that goes to prison. He's got powers, but you don't really know it for most of nobody knows it for most of the storyline. And I've sort of avoided that one. Well, at first I couldn't find everything, but I avoided it for a little while because it's like, I don't want to read about a kid in prison for 50 years. And now that I've read it, or most of it, I got a little bit at the end to read. It's just so entertaining. It's like, oh my gosh. And Steve Gerber, I know I know how he worked, and it's more, I guess, what is it, stream of consciousness type of writing, where he didn't know what was going to happen like the next issue. Totally unlike what I do, even though he's my favorite writer of all time. So I probably could learn more from my favorite writer, but he's just affected me since I was, 11, and all those things that he wrote are in my brain, and I hope I can access them when I need to. I do have like one character that is a little bit like Howard the Duck, and I'm not trying to copy Steve Gerber, but I feel it. I look at the finished product and I think, oh yeah, that's sort of like the Christian Steve Gerber kind of thing.
You're not a chain smoker, so it's kind of
And I read this example of a comic book artist was collaborating with, comic book writer talking to their artist. What do you like to draw? What don't you like to draw? We're gonna work on this sci-fi thing. And the artist was like, I don't like drawing spaceships. They were like, this is kind of a sci-fi story. So then they came up with like a tree ship that flew, so there's a bit of collaboration that you can work where your ideas get molded. And I like the whole process because I find a lot of times like the artist will improve upon. That's like one of the greatest things. They're like, oh, I see your panel. And then they just make it better, and then the colorist comes and makes it better. So it's a fun collaborative process.
Yeah. The joys of when it works. Do you guys have any suggestions? Like, collaboration is a big aspect of writing for comics. Do you guys have any suggestions like for that collaboration, like for ways to make the collaboration work well, or as opposed to because collaboration can go bad too, right? It can get difficult. It can add challenges where things might have been easy if you're just by yourself. So any thoughts on how to do that well, how to facilitate collaboration?
Well, in my instance, it was one of my best friends who was the artist and I was the writer. And, and we're all artists, right? Even if we're writing, if we're not drawing. And artists can be a bit sensitive about their material. And so I had to learn how to take feedback from him. I'd send him, the next page. He's like, hey, I'm going through this page and what he's saying here, and then the action you have him doing here doesn't make sense for him or his character. And first, like, whoa, it's my character. I wrote it. And then taking a step back and go, you know what? Yeah, you're right. He wouldn't be doing this because that's not the character that I've been writing up to this point. And having that relationship with your artist who can recognize that is huge. So if you can have a good repertoire with your artist where you can give him feedback and go, hey, I know you worked hard on this panel, but it's not what I envisioned. Can you go back and redo it? And you hear the sigh, oh, really? And I totally understand. But I need that panel for this to work. and it goes both ways, you know. And now I'm to the point where, please tell me what's wrong with it so I can go back and fix it, because I want people to like it. I want people to read it, and I want people to enjoy the story and whatever message it's conveying.
Talk with your artists. Get to know them. Get to understand their strengths, what they like to draw, what they're nervous about drawing. You know, as you say, if you've got a guy who doesn't like drawing spaceships, either steer away from spaceships in the story or give him copious visual reference. Say, make it look like this, you know.
Yeah.
But just that communication will help you tremendously. The success I had writing animation hinged on going down to the storyboard department and asking them, what's something you guys want to do? What's something that's easier for you to do? What are things that I do that are difficult that you would rather I steer away from? And they were tremendously helpful, and they helped me write good stories because I could avoid the problem areas.
That's really good.
I don't want to sound weird, but I'm going to. Comic books are sort of like having a baby. This is really obvious with the artist. So a penciler and an inker, sometimes they can have two distinct styles, and you put them together, and sometimes you get something wonderful, sometimes you get something awful. But but it still ends up looking like both of them. I especially remember like an early Iron Man issue. Story back in Tales of Suspense that was penciled by Don Heck and inked by Wally Wood. Now I love Wally Wood, and sometimes I don't really love Don Heck, but this was just beautiful. It's like Wally Wood just managed to bring out everything good in Don Heck, and it still looked like Don Heck. It looked like Wally Wood and it looked like Don Heck. Now you can also apply that to writers and artists. You got the writer of a comic book and the artist of a comic book working together. And the story, the final story, should reflect both of them. They're both coming together to create something new. And hopefully if you work together well and you're compatible, like I'm thinking maybe if the guy that doesn't like to draw spaceships probably shouldn't be drawing a science fiction story full of spaceships. But the final product, I mean, you look at the early days, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on Fantastic Four, or Stan Lee and Steve Ditko on Spider-Man. Neither of those would have been anywhere near as good without the other one. You needed both to create that initial magic that other people could build on for the next 60 years.
And it'll be trial and error in terms of the artist. To your point, Brian, one thing that I find is I asked my artist to send me their draft of the page, pencils first, just to take a look, make sure we're on the same page so they don't put in all this work. And then we say, wait, that's all wrong, you know? And I feel like it's not a big ask for them in that way. But in another story of that same artist and writer, the artist was so attached to the character, and the artist was like, I'm going to kill this character off. And the artist was like, I will quit if you kill this character. Which I think speaks to, like, you know, you're developing it well. But you know, I think through some trial and error, you'll find people like we work well together, right? You're not going to know always ahead of time if you will or not.
Yeah, so let's expand that a little bit. Like, okay, so there's working with an artist, but like I'm thinking of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and their Inklings group. One thing that I've experienced being part of a creative community and trying to, like, people give feedback, one of the most awkward things is when somebody that you know puts out a book and it's like, here we go, it's totally published. You've never seen this before. It just comes out. And they're like, look at it, isn't it great? And you look at it and you see like glaring errors and you don't want to say anything, right? So way better to say, like, so like Lewis and Tolkien were part of this group where they would share it as it was being created. It wasn't like, here's it fully formed. It was like they would, in the process, while it was still being they're putting the ingredients in, right? That's when they would get feedback. as opposed to, you know, fully baking it, taking it out of the oven and saying, hey, isn't it wonderful? So, so I think one really healthy thing that community can be part of our creative endeavors, if, you know, is ways we can get feedback on our stuff as we're working on it, not like just when it's finished. And I mean, that seems to be, unfortunately, like, I think it's kind of rare. Sometimes people have that, some creators have that, some people don't. But we, you know, one of our viewers was commenting and asking, like, what are some tips on finding getting feedback on your work prior to when it's done? Is it, you know, how do you go about that? And, you know, I imagine, you know, how do you find good groups, and how do you identify who the good people are to give you feedback, and how do you go about giving the feedback or receiving it? Any thoughts on that?
I think it depends on the type of feedback you're looking for. For me personally, I have a couple people I know who are really great with spelling and grammar. They may not understand the story overall, but they'll be able to read through, you know, take a red pen to it. And it's like, no, this is there, not there. And this is, you know, your, not your, you know, just kind of the basic stuff that especially with, because I'm doing some screenplays and trying to get people to read it. I don't want them to see that and go, oh, well, this guy doesn't know the difference, you know? So that I think that's just one quick way to do it. But another one is just story structure. So you're looking at friends who you trust, for one, because again, Eric, like having a baby, right? This is your baby that you're birthing, and to have somebody take it and like tear it apart and send it back to you is heartbreaking. My son took a lot of classes for filmmaking, and he had this one film he wanted to do, and he actually did it, but he gave me the script first and said, I trust you. Can you read through this? And, you know, so I went through and I'm like, you know, and I'm doing my best to be as nice as possible, but taking the red pen and going, this doesn't make sense. These don't connect. You need to connect these. This needs to pay off. You showed this object. What is it going to do later on? And, you know, I gave it back to him. Hey, read through it. You know, I love you. And he read it, came back. He's like, do you like anything about it? You know, I'm like, no, I really, really like it. It's just, it needs work. And he worked on it. He got to film it. We got to show it at a local film house and stuff, and it was great. But you just have to realize that you have to take everything we have to trust the right person to do it, who, you know, is coming back in a positive way and say, I'm only criticizing this so that it'll actually help you. So pick wisely, I guess, is the answer.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think if you're doing a comic book, ask someone who reads comic books, or someone who's written comic books, right? Like, versus like, hey, I gave it to my mom. She doesn't know anything about comics. She thought it was great, right?
But she's good at spelling.
But I also think that we also have to give ourselves and give the other writers room to put out those first few that aren't very strong, right? Like, give ourselves permission to fail, to be learning, to be growing, you know, like, not even successful writers, like, not all their novels are great, right? You can see them getting better. And so giving ourselves to say, you know, it's a process, right? My first thing is unlikely to be a home run, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I did give my stuff to my mother a few times to read on purpose, because she wasn't a comic book person. And actually that was helpful for me, because if she didn't understand something,
yeah,
I wondered, would anybody understand this? Or she didn't think this was good. Like, some things I drew, it's like, oh, this is like, you know, classic 90s image kind of style. And it's like, she didn't like it. It's like, oh, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I should draw like that. But I do have, I learned something as an artist that, again, I think can be applied to being a writer. I remember showing my artwork around Comic-Con one time, trying to get work and just throwing my portfolio around. literally within half an hour, I showed my portfolio to one editor, and he said, "Oh, these are awful backgrounds. You really need to work on your backgrounds." Within the next few minutes, I showed it to another editor. He said, "Oh, these backgrounds are wonderful. I love your backgrounds. These are the best backgrounds." And then I realized, oh, none of these people know what they're talking about. Or maybe they do, but it's all skewed from their perspective. So I'm sometimes reluctant to show my writing to friends of mine, that because I know my friends so well, I know exactly what they're going to tell me. Like, one friend is, likes comic books, more satirical, and it's like, he's going to tell me this story isn't satirical enough. And another friend likes his story is scary. He's going to tell me, oh, this story isn't scary enough. But as long as you know who you're talking to, you can take it all with a grain of salt, and maybe, either show it to nobody or show it to a lot of people, and then take all the feedback and sort of average it out and take it for what it's worth.
I try, when I'm looking at anybody's work, unless I spot a very obvious technical problem, like the wrong there or the wrong your, I would say at most, this didn't resonate with me. I couldn't connect with the material. I never make the person feel you did something wrong, you did something bad, but I do tell them honestly how I responded to it. And, if I say this didn't work, or I kept falling out of the story because I would encounter things that, just seemed jarring to me, I'm not putting the blame on them, but I am indicating where, for me, there were problem areas.
Yeah, that's good.
Sometimes, like I said, if it's a purely technical issue, if the feet are too big, you just tell them, the feet look a little big here. On the other hand, it might be you're just out of step and you don't understand what it is they're trying to do, and other people will respond to it in a better way. I appreciate feedback. I'm part of a writers group. We are very careful never to get personal, never to be super critical, but we will say, that part sounded a little clunky. It was hard to follow what was going along here. I really didn't feel the emotion you were trying to get across. And you offer feedback that helps people sharpen their work, not, oh, that was stupid, that was crappy. One person in our group is as diametrically opposed in their writing interests to mine as you can possibly be. And we just recognize we're not critiquing what it is you're interested in. We're critiquing how you express that idea and how you got it across. And so, we get along. We can honestly critique one another's work without judging it.
Yeah, let me amend what I said a minute ago. You don't want to work in a vacuum, because you could just be fooling yourself all sorts of different ways. You could be going off on tangents that nobody else cares about. I said I'm reluctant to show it around to my friends, but then I belong to an apazine or fanzine for the last 20 years, and I put my work in there every 2 months, and I could get feedback from 15 different people on the latest thing that I am writing or drawing or both. But again, I've read these guys' comments for 20 years, some of them, and I know exactly where each one of them is coming from. So it does help to get feedback, but it does also help to know where the feedback's coming from.
Yeah, and I've been part of a writing group as well, and one of the things I think that occurred to me in that group is that you also want to identify where the writer themselves is trying to go. It's not just where they're coming from, but where they're trying to go. So you can say you're trying to tell this story. If say I like horror stories and the person is not trying to write a horror story, and I keep saying, "Ooh, put horror stuff in here," then they're going to be very frustrated with my feedback, right? So I think that can be helpful, is just try to clarify what their goal is. And there's this really cool bit of writing feedback I've heard. I haven't experienced this, but Patrick Rothfuss is a writer, and he was talking about he sends some of his manuscripts to this particular couple, and they will read the manuscript. And as they go through the manuscript, they'll actually mark in the margins how they feel, like their emotional response to that portion of the story. And I thought, like, that is brilliant, because that tells you where it's working, right? If you're hoping it's going to be a tense moment and they say, I was really tense here, then it's like, yes, it's working, right? But I think I've fallen into the trap, unfortunately, of like, I read a manuscript and then I'm like, okay, where are the problems? And I'm problem. And that doesn't tell the person who wrote it where it's working that well, right? They know where it's not working, but where it is working, I have to remind myself, like, always do the what's working well step before I go to the problems. Like, what are the problems? Because I forget. I mean, I just go straight to like, let's analyze. And I think it's really important so that you don't discourage people. Like, people want to know that, like, it works, at least some, right, before they get all the other stuff. So, all right, we're close to the end here. So let's just do like a final closing question. If you guys could give yourself like 1 or 2 pieces of advice, if you could go back in time, talk to your younger self before you came all the way through your writing experience to today, what would you give a younger version of you? What's the best advice you could give to them?
I'll go first, and I wanted to throw in a resource. So I think like I did pick up McLeod's books. I think just doing more of reading how to do the craft at the onset would have been beneficial. So one book I recommend is Brian Michael Bendis. He has Words for Pictures that covers a big gamut of the whole spectrum of creating comics, and that's helpful. Stephen King on writing. I have Masterclass, so there's a bunch of writers on there. So just kind of part of the process of just learning from other writers, and going to writers that I like and saying like, what do you have to say on this? And then also kind of seeing what things are working and just playing in the sandbox a little bit more.
Awesome.
I kind of go along with that in terms of, I mean, my younger me is just go out and do it. Don't worry about what other people are going to think, what they're going to do. This is all for yourself at this point, just like learning the craft and learning how to put a character together and learning how, and the only way you can do that is by actually doing it. Like writing scripts for me right now, they say, well, it's about your 7th script when you're actually doing it correctly. And, and I'm about at that point now. And I'm like, oh, now I kind of know what I'm doing. And back in the day, I didn't know what I was doing. I would look at a comic book and like, oh, this is how they kind of put the panels together. And I could do that, and look at Watchmen, what they did. And there's like no dialogue here at all. The artist can do everything. And it's those misconceptions at the time that, had me, lacking in my writing, especially for the very first time. And I should have done more. I should have had more drafts, more feedback, more everything. And that's where it comes like writing every day if you can, which I was terrible at. I write in spurts and I get the idea and I go. So everybody's going to be a little different. So you can't, don't hold yourself to somebody else and what they've done, what they've accomplished. It's one of those things where it's part of the learning process. And if you don't do it, you're not going to learn. So if you have an idea, go and do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to follow up with that, again, going back to my first comic, and I did this in 1997. Well, the first version of this. This is my 2020 version, new cover, new printing. But the first version was 1997, and it was, I had a deal with a small publisher, and we were going to do like 12 issues. So I really planned out all 12 issues, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. And then that fell through, and I ended up self-publishing the first issue. And then it wasn't quite as good as I wanted it to be. I was a perfectionist back then, and now I'm not. It's like, just do it, get it down. And I wish I had just barreled on through, warts and all. I wish I had done, you know, the next issue and the next issue. And then I see this one guy at Comic-Con, and I think he has his own character, and he just puts out one comic a year. He continues with that character. And I figure, oh man, if I had started my 12-issue series in 1997, I would have been done in 2009. You know, it's like, I should have just barreled through, even if, you know, it wasn't going to be a success for me, or there were problems. Because what's the saying? Is it 1,000 hours or the first 10,000 hours of anything that you do is going to be lousy? You start getting good after that. So you want to get those 10,000 hours in and get them under your belt, and then you can really, you know, you can really start flying.
Buzz, you got any thoughts?
My younger self would be very personal and of no use to anyone else.
All right. Okay, guys. Well, we're out of time. So actually, if you guys are, I'll go around. Let's go around one more time. And if you guys are working on anything you want to talk about, or if you can tell people where they can find you online or your work, feel free to let them know here, and we'll try to include some of that in the notes on the video as well. So why don't we just go from let's do Buzz. Let's go backwards around.
I'm Buzz Dixon. I can be found on my blog, www.buzzdixon, BUZZDIXON, all one word, .com. I am also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Excellent. Eric?
Well, I did I published a lot of comic books last year during the pandemic, and it's like the whole plan, I started right before the pandemic. And the whole plan was to sell them at conventions, which, of course, we haven't had any for a long time. But that's my plan. And so you will see these on a convention table at some point. And that I'm going to continue doing. Oh, this is one I did at Foursquare Missions Press. So a lot of my tracts and small comics, my evangelistic comics, like these little ones, those are available at FoursquareMissionsPress.org, and you can order a lot of my stuff there. But the personal stuff, I'll make available at conventions and maybe through mail order at some point. Watch Facebook for coming attractions.
Excellent. Lewis?
We publish under Rooted Chronicles. You just Google rootedchronicles.com. Samson TN is a short for Samson the Nazarite. You can get to our graphic novel there online.
Excellent. And Brian?
So I'm self-published Spirit Night, as you can see on the camera there, and it's spirit-night.com is the website. And right now I'm actually about to do reprints of the graphic novel because I've run out, which is a good thing. And now that Comic-Con and the other cons are going to start up again, I can't wait to get out there and start selling again. And that's personal stuff. And then this is Kingdom Comics, and this is my character on the front cover of Kingdom Comics Presents this month. It's my character Rotary. Actually, it's a character that they asked me to write for. They're like, hey, we found this character. We have this character. We don't have a backstory. We don't have anything for him, but we think he's kind of cool. Can you write something? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So you can find these at kingdomcomicsonline.com. And so hopefully his character will keep going and be on more covers.
Awesome. We had a question in the comments whether any of us are happy well, I'll just make it broad. Are there any conventions you guys are planning to be at in the near future? They were asking about MegaCon in Florida, but in general, do you guys have any plans at all yet? Or is this still pretty open to air?
I'm hoping we could be at Comic-Con in San Diego around the Thanksgiving holiday. And there's a few, I'm in the Central Valley of California, so we have a bunch of conventions starting up. We just had our first one here in Lodi. And so there's one coming up in Modesto and Turlock and Sacramento, and they're all just popping up now that all the restrictions are down. So I got to start looking into those.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys. It's been a great conversation, and maybe we'll have to do part 2 sometime later if you guys are still are up for that. But for now, thank you so much, and you guys have a wonderful day. And thank you for everyone who joined us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Buzz.